Hi everyone. So this is the discussion for our class 3. Today we're going to be going over some important vocabulary. We're going to do some practice for assignment 1. And for assignment 1, we'll go over how to define behavior, how to provide examples, and how to write a SMART goal. So this vocabulary will be really important for your quiz. So make sure that you're filling out your handout and using that. That way you can use that to support you with studying for your quiz coming up this week. So going over SMART goals are really important. They're especially used for writing goals in IEPs or individualized education plans. The first part of the SMART term is specific. So this term right here. So specific refers to being observable and clear. So a non-example of a specific goal is Adam will be a better reader. This doesn't tell us how Adam can become a better reader or in what domain of reading, because as we know, reading covers a really broad scope of skills that you need. So for an example of something that's specific, it says Adam will be able to read a passage orally in a grade level book at 110 to 130 words per minute with random errors. So this one is something that's very specific. It's something that can be observed and it's something that we can measure, which is going into our next part of the SMART goal. So M stands for measurable. So measurable means that it needs to be linked to some type of data source. So a non-example of that is with the aid of a calculator, Emma will be able to solve math problems. So this doesn't provide us with any information about how are we measuring the number of math problems she's solving, how many does she need to get correct. So these are all things that we need to consider when creating a SMART goal. So in an example, with the aid of a calculator, Emma will be able to solve math problems that involve the computation of fractions and decimals with 75% accuracy. So here we're giving more specificity about the type of math problems she will solve, and we're also saying with how much accuracy she needs to be able to solve these problems. So then the next part of the SMART goal is attainable. So going on to the next slide. Attainable refers to realistically doable by the student within the time frame allowed. So in addition to being able to measure our goals, we also need to set a time frame for them to complete it and to see if it's actually realistically attainable by the student. So non-example will be Jackson will write at grade level with no errors in spelling or punctuation. So this goal is not realistic because it's not leaving room for errors, which likely if you're giving a student a writing goal, that probably indicates that they really struggle in this area. So it's more likely that we'll want to lessen the amount of errors and also make it more attainable for the student to achieve. So for an example, Jackson will write a paragraph with at least 5 sentences, each greater than 8 words with no more than 2 errors in spelling and punctuation. So, then this makes it more doable for Jackson to achieve. It's more specific because we're saying that we want him to at least write paragraphs, and we're making it more realistic with the amount of errors that he can make. So then next, we want to add to this is how long are we giving Jackson to complete this goal? So that would be part of the T term, which is timely. So for example, if we wanted to add a time frame, we could say by the month of next year, by October of next year, Jackson will be able to achieve this goal, depending on where he's at currently. Next part of the SMART term is relevant, so the R. So that means socially significant for the student. So essentially this is saying that we don't want to create goals that isn't going to help the student in some way improve. And so we want to make sure that anything that we're assigning to a student as a goal will actually help them in the long term and help them across settings. So it help them in school, maybe help them outside of school. So here's a non-example of a relevant goal. It says, during small group activities, Dana will learn how to pass out papers to her peers. So while passing out papers can be a good goal, in this case, maybe a better goal would be to focus on what Dana is actually doing in the group. So passing out papers might not be something that we write in an IEP. It could be a goal that we work on outside of it, but I think we want to get something bigger. So, for example, during small group activities, Dana will look attentively toward the speaker of the group 90% of the time in 4 out of 5 opportunities. So the last part of the SMART term goal is, SMART term is timely, the T. So that means set to occur and be evaluated within a specific time frame. So a non-example is Jeremy will be able to orally explain class vocabulary words with 90% accuracy on 8 out of 10 trials. His progress will be measured through a language assessment. So the problem with this one is that it doesn't give any type of date or time frame. So we want to make sure that we're always very clear about when we expect a student to accomplish a goal by. So here we say by May 15th, Jeremy will be able to orally explain class vocabulary words with 90% accuracy on 8 out of 10 trials. His progress will be measured through a monthly language assessment. So here not only do I include the date, but I'm also saying how many times we will be measuring his vocabulary words through monthly assessments. So moving on from the acronym SMART goals, we're now going to go into different types of measuring. So the first types of measuring is all types of continuous measures. So first, let's go over frequency. Frequency refers to the number of events in a period of time. And an example would be measuring the number of times a student asks for help during homework time. A non-example would be recording the length of time that they ask for help. So with frequency, we're really looking at how many times is this occurring, not how long. For rate, however, we're looking at number of events per unit of time. So here, an example would be 24 words read correctly per minute. A non-example would be 24 words read. So this here would be more similar to frequency, whereas rate, we can think of it as adding a step by also looking at not only how many times the event is occurring, but what is the rate? So what is the per unit per time? Percentage of opportunities, that is the number of times it happens by the number of times it could have happened. So for example, we could look at a student was compliant 40% of the time after a prompt was given. A non-example would be was compliant for one instance every 5 minutes. That would be a little bit more similar to rate. Whereas percentage of opportunities, where we have to first calculate how many times could this student have been how many times could this student have responded to a prompt? How many opportunities was he given? And then how many of those opportunities did he actually take? Which in this example, we're saying 40%. Next, we're looking at duration. So duration measures the length of time that a behavior occurred. So an example is using a stopwatch to determine how long a tantruming behavior lasts. A non-example would be counting the number of times the student tantrums. So again, that's going a little bit more into frequency. So if we look at the number of times they tantrum over a period of time, that would be frequency, whereas duration, we're trying to look at the actual length of the tantruming behavior. Latency is measuring the length of the time between a prompt and a response. So for example, using a stopwatch, we can look at the time between the teacher gives directions and the start of a student's beginning an activity. So we're looking more so here at where is the stimulus or what is happening. And in this case, the teacher gives directions. And then how long does it take the student to actually start to follow those directions? A non-example would be using a stopwatch to see how long the student is engaged in activity. Again, this is going back more into duration. Next, let's look at time sampling. So instead of looking at examples and non-examples, we're going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of these. So for partial interval recording, just give a step back, this would be non-continuous measures. So we're now going into that part of different types of measurements. So the first one being partial interval recording. So for this one, you mark down when the behavior occurs at any point. The advantage of this method is that you get a rough indication of both rate and duration, but a disadvantage is that it generally overestimates true occurrence of the behavior. For a whole interval recording, the behavior occurs for the entire duration. That's when you will record it. The advantage of it is that it provides a rough indication of duration of behavior. However, the disadvantage is that it underestimates actual occurrence of the behavior because like I said, you're only marking down the behavior if it occurs during the entire interval. But if it only occurs for part of the interval, you wouldn't put it down. So that's why it could underestimate the occurrence. And then lastly, we have momentary time sampling. So this describes when you mark down if the behavior occurs at the moment the interval begins. The advantage to this method is that it's a more accurate estimation of duration of behavior, especially compared to whole interval. However, it can be subject to random error. So next, let's go into assignment 1. So in your handout on the next page, I have an example of a vignette. So we're going to walk through this vignette and talk about how we could potentially fill out the document based on this problem. So for all you Office fans out there, tried to put a shout out in it. So it says Michael is a 4-year-old student attending Dunder Mifflin Preschool. His teacher, Mr. Wallace, asked for your help with some of Michael's behaviors. Michael will throw himself on the ground and start kicking and screaming, sometimes for a few seconds and other times for a few minutes. Mr. Wallace reports that this happens regularly during instructional time. All right, so part 1, we want to define the target behavior. In this case, it would be tantruming. And we know this because looking back, it says Michael will throw himself on the ground and start kicking and screaming. And so we know that these are all behaviors that are in line with tantruming. And with target behavior, we usually want to use one word, one or no more than 2 words to describe what the target behavior is. And then for the definition, we then want to explain what does tantruming actually look like specifically for Michael. So here I put, throughout the school day, Michael will tantrum, which consists of him laying down on the floor, kicking, and screaming. Examples, so kicking, screaming, laying on the floor. Non-examples, so when we get to non-examples, think about things that are considered part of his behavior but would actually be appropriate depending on the context. So an example of Michael tantruming is him kicking. However, if he's kicking a ball during recess, that does not mean that he's tantruming. Another example is him laying on the floor. However, if he's sitting on the floor during story time, this would not be considered tantruming. So these are both good non-examples. Next part of your assignment is you're going to pick a method to measure the behavior. So there can be more than one right answer for this. Just make sure that you are able to justify why you are using that measurement system based on what we're seeing in the prompt. So before I explain why I chose duration, let's go back to this prompt. So one of the key things I was looking at here is that Mr. Wallace reports that Michael will scream sometimes for a few seconds and other times for a few minutes. So that kind of indicates that Mr. Wallace doesn't have a clear picture of how long the tantruming lasts. And since Michael is kicking and throwing himself on the ground, that can also be potentially dangerous for himself and distracting for his peers. So it'd be important to know how long the tantruming behavior is occurring. So here I said, since it's unclear the length of time Michael's tantruming occurs, it would be informative to determine the average duration of his behavior. A measurement system to be used. So I said a consultant. So make sure you say who would be doing the measuring. So that could be a school psychologist, special educator, BCBA, another teacher. We'll use a stopwatch to measure the length of time that the tantrum occurs during Mr. Wallace's class to measure the duration of Michael's tantrums. The observation will occur for 45 minutes. Average duration will be calculated by the sums of all durations divided by the number of occurrences. So here I'm very specific. I talk about who's going to be taking the measurements, how long is the observation period going to occur, and then how are you going to actually report the final results. So if you include all of these in your response, that will help give you a more specific and clear answer. As I said before, there's not one one answer. So if you wanted to, you could say they're going to observe during 2 portions of the day. They're going to observe for recess and maybe instructional time, for example. You can also change the number of minutes the observation period lasts depending on what makes sense for the prompt that you're given. So now last, I'm going to show you an example of a SMART goal. So For this SMART goal, there's obviously multiple ways we can address Michael's tantruming behavior, but let's assume for a second that Michael is tantruming because he wants to escape Mr. Wallace's instruction. So what can we do to help Michael do an appropriate behavior instead of tantruming? So here I put by October 10th, 2021, during instructional time, instead of tantruming, Michael will present Mr. Wallace with a break card with 80% accuracy in 4 out of 5 trials as measured by direct observations and teacher reports. So here, for the SMART part of the goal, so specific, he's going to be using a break card. For measurable, we're saying with 80% accuracy in 4 out of 5 trials. So that means at 5 points during the day, say like Mr. Wallace gives instructions at 5 or has instructional time 5 instances during the day. Out of 4 of those, Michael should be able to appropriately give the break card without tantruming. For the attainable, this goal is doable to teach Michael, and it's age appropriate. Michael in this scenario is 4 years old, and the teacher can easily teach the 4-year-old how to use a break card and reward him when he uses that in order to reduce his level of tantruming. Relevant, this will help Michael appropriately communicate what he wants and will help him lay down in the future and to appropriately communicate both in school and hopefully in his home settings as well, assuming that tantruming is an issue there as well. And then timely, I provide the date for when this behavior will occur. I put for the following year, but it can also definitely be sooner than that, depending on your particular vignette. So as a friendly reminder, your assignment 1 is due on October 30th. If you need an extension, please email me and Dr. Johnson in advance. If you need extra support, please email me to set up a time for office hours, and I can try to support you in getting your assignment done. Thank you so much, and I hope you guys have a great week.